"Your cornfield is a fire hazard." That's what she shouted, like my crop was a massive matchstick waiting to set her flawless little suburb ablaze. At first, I laughed. How could standing corn possibly be riskier than her backyard tiki torches? But the way she said it, sharp and public, like a verdict etched in stone, made it clear this wasn't just about tall grass or HOA nitpicking anymore. Then came the scent of fuel where it had no business being. Footprints by my fence at hours when no decent person should be walking. Suddenly every rustle among the stalks felt like someone was testing me, daring me to lose everything I'd built. What would you do if your land was branded a hazard overnight? I held the first ear of corn from the season, my hands trembling. 20 years of farming, and harvest week still shakes me. One healthy ear means Sarah's college fund stays intact. The equipment loan gets paid. My family keeps our home. But that morning, a smell stopped me cold, a sharp chemical tang of fuel drifting from my fence line. It didn't belong there. It was completely wrong. My 15 acres sit beside the Meadowbrook HOA community. I've never been part of their HOA. My farmland predates their subdivision by decades. The corn was tall and golden, just days from harvest. But Mara had been circling my property with predatory interest for months. The board member in pressed pantsuits with her clipboard, always patrolling the fence line, measuring, calculating, plotting something I couldn't yet put my finger on. Then came the email, a slap across my face. Final agricultural fire hazard notice. Immediate compliance or legal action from Mara. She claimed she had authority to enforce fire safety regulations on farmland, threatening residential property values. Total fiction. HOAs have zero control over agricultural acreage. I knew my rights, but seeing it written out with official letterhead and legal jargon made my stomach twist. She was building a case, brick by brick. At dawn, walking the fence, I found them. Fuel canisters hidden in the tall grass on my side of the line. 3 red jugs, still slick with residue, shoved deep into the weeds where no one should ever find them. Someone was setting something up. From my volunteer firefighting days, I knew the signs of flammable prep work. The placement, the quantity, the timing. This wasn't random. This was deliberate groundwork for destruction. When I checked my security camera footage, my hands began to shake. Mara herself, sneaking onto my acreage after midnight, carrying jugs and what looked like timing devices. She moved with precision, checking her watch, measuring the distance from my corn rows to the fence. She wasn't wandering. She was scouting, plotting. The woman who'd complained about every stray blade of grass was now mapping a plan to wipe out everything I'd built. I still couldn't fully believe my own eyes. Papers dropped by the fence confirmed my worst fears. Mara's handwritten notes outlining staged agricultural fire incidents to back insurance claims and force land sales. Her writing carried the same clipped tone she used at HOA meetings. But here it revealed criminal intent. This wasn't harassment anymore. It wasn't suburban politics. It was a calculated effort to erase everything I'd worked for, just to cash in. 20 years of farming had trained me to sense trouble early. Storms, pests, machinery failures. But this wasn't a natural disaster. This was human malice. Someone who'd looked me in the eye during neighborhood disputes was now scheming to destroy my livelihood for money. That cut deeper than any storm ever could. Weather doesn't plot to ruin you for profit. I picked up the papers she'd dropped near the jugs. Insurance payout estimates for farm fire damage spilling over into residential property values. Real estate valuations for distressed farmland. Property acquisition strategies for community expansion. She'd done her homework, run the numbers, and charted the gains from my family's ruin. Her neat handwriting even included profit margins and timelines. Professional-level criminal planning dressed up as community. Concern. The timer mechanisms attached to the fuel. Canisters made everything brutally clear. She wasn't planning a random fire. She was setting up automated destruction that would give her a perfect alibi. Start the timers, go home, create witnesses to place her elsewhere, then let my life's work burn. Afterward, she'd swoop in with pre-drafted insurance claims and property offers, posing as the concerned neighbor helping with cleanup. Diabolical and brilliant all at once. Mara wasn't stopping at her usual community meetings. Instead, she arranged something very different. Chairs set out for 3 suited men behind the HOA clubhouse. No agenda, no residents, just a projector humming and folders marked urgent. I legally documented everything from my shed roof parabolic mic and camera trained on the glowing window. My equipment caught every word drifting through those thin walls. Hearing it, I knew this was no longer about neighborhood politics. This was organized crime in polite clothing. When the farmland burned and damaged residential property, she told the adjusters with icy confidence, "We need pre-approved claims, ready payouts, no delays." She pitched the scam like a product launch. My harvest was tomorrow's weather to her, inevitable, already budgeted, packaged into neat slides with dollar signs attached. This wasn't a planning session. It was a criminal workshop disguised as corporate strategy. The asset grab angle was impossible to miss. Burned-out farms, she explained, could be snapped up for pennies and folded into community expansion. Her projector threw maps on the wall. Red arrows, profit margins, real estate forecasts. Arson leads to insurance fraud, which leads to cheap land grabs, which leads to personal gain. It was criminal math in glowing bullet points, camouflaged as community growth. My hidden recorder captured her exact words, crossing every legal line. "Sometimes property owners need dramatic motivation to accept reasonable offers," she said, sipping coffee, smiling like it was nothing. That wasn't persuasion. It was a threat, not neighborly pressure, outright menace. My hands trembled as I replayed the files, each syllable sharp enough for federal court. In my head, I was already assembling the trial, piece by piece, evidence by evidence. The insurance adjuster's response sealed it. "Agricultural fires create obvious liability for landowners," he said eagerly, "so claims can be processed instantly for community protection." They were rehearsing the paperwork before a single flame had been lit. Professionals in suits and letterhead, using legal language to cloak asset theft through fire and fraud. This wasn't one rogue board member. It was a polished team preparing a crime as if it were quarterly business goals. Their timeline talk showed just how calculated the whole scheme really was. Tomorrow night promised ideal conditions for a fire. Mara murmured it while flicking through weather apps on her phone. The instant smoke appeared, paperwork had to be filed. They discussed timing like dancers planning choreography, wind speeds, humidity, how long emergency crews might take to arrive. Every factor was calculated for maximum damage with minimal suspicion. This wasn't improvisation. It was a criminal performance rehearsed down to the hour. My farm existed on their schedule like an entry on a spreadsheet. Hearing people casually outline the destruction of your life's work as if drafting a business plan changes something inside you forever. In that moment, I understood. These weren't neighbors. They were predators. My family's future was nothing but a profit column in their ledger. Their voices carried a smooth professionalism but no trace of humanity, a cool, practiced detachment. Sociopathy disguised in office attire, preparing to torch livelihoods with the ease of ordering a meal. I began archiving everything. Video clips, photos of every participant, notes stamped with dates and times, each backed up twice. While they sketched out a burn plan, I was building a case file thick enough for federal prosecutors. Every memory card, every copy, I handled like courtroom evidence. If they wanted a criminal game, I'd ensure the prosecutors had ammunition for the maximum sentence. When Aaron, my attorney, heard the recordings, the color drained from his face. "This isn't civil anymore," he whispered. "This is conspiracy, arson, insurance fraud, federal crimes. Call the FBI immediately." His voice was low but edged with the weight of years in courtrooms. This wasn't a spat over property lines or grass height. This was organized crime dressed as real estate deals. Unless someone intervened, Mara would set my harvest ablaze the following night, confident no one would stop her. The Bureau's response surpassed even my highest hopes for efficiency. Agent Patterson treated my call as urgent from the first words. He explained that agricultural fires linked to insurance schemes fell directly under national jurisdiction. "We're opening an immediate inquiry on your evidence," he assured me. This was real law enforcement, not small-town politics or neighborly disputes, but professionals who recognized that planning to burn someone's livelihood for profit was a major national crime. Within hours of my first contact, the state fire marshal's office dispatched veteran investigators after reviewing my audio files. A criminal probe was underway before a single match was struck, built entirely on the conspiracy evidence I'd gathered. These experts had decades of experience unraveling fire schemes. They spoke the language I knew from my own firefighting days, accelerant placement, timing, criminal motive. To them, this wasn't a neighborly quarrel, but a calculated crime in progress. The coordination between agencies amazed me. Bureau agents, state fire specialists, and the county sheriff's office worked together to build a prevention strategy for the planned blaze. 3 tiers of law enforcement had judged this conspiracy serious enough to pour in resources for both prevention and prosecution. It felt surreal to watch professionals treating the destruction of my farm not as a petty dispute, but as organized crime cloaked in local politics. My new role as informant felt strange but absolutely necessary. "Mr. Walker, you'll wear a recording device and continue your normal routine," Agent Patterson instructed. "When the fire begins, trigger the emergency signal, and we'll respond immediately." Overnight, I'd become a cooperating witness for national agents against people who had once waved at me across the fence line. 20 years of volunteer firefighting had never prepared me for this, standing as a national witness against neighbors turned fire starters. Law enforcement rolled into my fields with advanced gear. Infrared units watched the ground. Discrete audio devices picked up murmurs across the fence. Simple monitors tested soil for chemical residues. They placed GPS trackers on Mara's vehicle and followed the financial trails of her partners to build the scam case. It was a focused inquiry with resources I never imagined could converge on one farm. During the sting operation briefing, the lead investigator showed just how seriously they viewed agricultural arson. "We'll catch them in the act with overwhelming evidence," he promised. The charges were long: arson, insurance fraud, conspiracy, property destruction, each carrying years of prison time under national guidelines. This wouldn't end in community service or mediation. It would end with indictments, handcuffs, and real punishment. The criminal psychology specialist warned me what to expect from someone like Mara. Fire setters in insurance scams often turn violent when they sense exposure. People who destroy property for profit will also harm anything that threatens their gain. Personal safety protocols weren't optional. They were mandatory. This was no longer just about crops. It was about survival. They issued me protective gear and direct communication tools. I now carried a panic button linked to multiple agencies, wore a GPS tracker for my own location, and held an encrypted radio for live updates. What had started as a property crime had escalated into a potential violent crime requiring national protection. The scale of their precautions revealed exactly how dangerous these criminals were considered. Not only to me, but to the wider community. Agent Patterson told me my cooperation could shield other farmers. "These operations rarely stop at one field," he explained gravely. "They refine their methods, multiply their targets, expand their profits. Halting it here could prevent future victims across the entire region." That evening, Sarah asked about college expenses. Unaware criminals were preparing to torch the foundation of our family's security. I couldn't tell her that national agents were poised to arrest fire starters the following night, but they had assured me the plot would be stopped. Seasoned investigators with proven records now stood against local schemers carrying fuel and timers. For once, the balance felt tipped in our favor. 2 decades of volunteer firefighting had taught me how to stop flames with preparation and speed. Now I was helping to stop the crimes that caused those flames, standing beside national investigators instead of local volunteers. The mission was still to protect lives and property, but this time with real prosecutorial power behind me. Tomorrow night would decide whether criminals could continue destroying farm families for gain, or whether justice would finally rise. Later that night, national agents confirmed Mara had purchased more accelerants, caught on credit card surveillance. The attack was imminent, exactly as she'd mapped out in her secret meetings. But law enforcement was ready with overwhelming surveillance and rapid response units. She believed she was stalking a defenseless farmer. In reality, she was walking straight into a sting. Just after midnight, Mara and her accomplice crept toward my field carrying fuel canisters. National surveillance documented every step as they poured deliberate lines of accelerant through the corn rows, patterns mapped in advance. This wasn't random vandalism or a careless blaze. It was a deliberate, calculated torching, executed with practiced precision. 20 years of labor was about to be devoured in minutes by criminals who saw my family's survival only as a revenue stream. Infrared cameras caught them igniting multiple points across 15 acres of standing corn. This was no accident, but a systematic attempt to erase my life's work, timed to wind shifts and burning conditions. They acted like professional fire setters, destroying Sarah's college future for nothing but insurance money. The fire moved exactly as they had planned, swallowing months of labor and years of sacrifice in one orchestrated blaze. I hit my emergency signal immediately. This is Walker. Fire in progress. Multiple ignition points. Need immediate response. Within minutes, the roar of engines and the wail of sirens filled the air, red and blue lights slicing through the night. Federal agents, state specialists, county deputies, and fire crews all converged at speed. The response was sharp, precise, and clearly meant to catch criminals in the act of serious national crimes. The coordination was so seamless it felt like they had drilled for this very scenario. Mara had torched my cornfields, nearly 40% of my yearly income gone, sacrificed for her scheme. Sarah's college fund went up with those flames, burned by the same woman who had smiled at community gatherings while secretly plotting our downfall. The fury inside me burned hotter than the fire itself. Someone I had trusted for years chose to destroy everything I had built, rather than earn her living honestly. Agents swarmed in and arrested Mara and her accomplice right there. They were still clutching the ignition devices, caught red-handed, surrounded by undeniable proof of planning and intent. "You're under arrest for arson, insurance fraud, and conspiracy," Agent Patterson announced as handcuffs snapped shut. This was no neighborly dispute or local political spat. These were felony charges for devastating crimes. Someone had deliberately set fire to my livelihood just to cash an insurance payout. Have you ever had neighbors who turned out to be schemers in disguise? Watching federal officers haul away someone from your own street for torching your fields is beyond surreal. Community disagreements don't normally end in felony indictments, but insurance fires cross the line that turns neighbors into criminals. The thoroughness of the evidence collection stunned me. Agents secured ignition timers, audio recordings of planning, video of the blaze being set, and chemical residue confirming arson. Even as flames still licked across my fields, professional teams were already gathering airtight evidence for trial. Every piece of the crime was documented for its inevitable day in court. The fire crews, swift and prepared, contained the blaze quickly. But still, 40% of my harvest was gone, erased by criminal intent. Insurance might soften part of the blow, but restitution would cover the rest. By law, offenders must repay victims for every bit of damage caused. Mara would be forced to pay for every ear of corn she destroyed, plus interest and penalties. Yet the real wound went far deeper. Seeing someone you've known burn away 2 decades of your labor for selfish gain leaves scars no restitution can heal. This wasn't just financial damage, it was betrayal of trust. The destruction of my family's future calculated as her advantage. Charges were filed right at the scene, multiple felonies stacked one after the other. First-degree arson, carrying more than 20 years. Insurance fraud, another 10. Conspiracy, another 5. Property destruction with restitution and fines. This was no slap on the wrist case, it was real justice, matching punishment to the crimes inflicted on farming families. Agents moved on to Mara's house to execute search warrants, looking for further evidence and possible collaborators. The insurance adjuster and property assessor from the meeting the day before were next on the list. Under conspiracy law, every participant faces the same penalties no matter their role. Planners and executors are equal under national law when it comes to organized crime. At dawn, FBI officers stormed Mara's house. Neighbors gathered in their robes and slippers, stunned to watch what they had only seen on the evening news. Federal agents dismantling the home of their community leader. This wasn't a neighborhood squabble. Their trusted HOA board member was now exposed as a felon running rackets against farm families. Inside her home, agents uncovered mountains of evidence, file cabinets filled with fraudulent documents, records of payouts, maps of distressed farms pinned to walls, communication with new targets, bloated bank accounts, and correspondence hinting at even bigger schemes. It was a professional racket, hiding behind the mask of community leadership. Shock rippled through the crowd. Dozens who had trusted Mara with local decisions now realized she had been a federal criminal all along. Faces showed disbelief, confusion, anger, even fear of how far her plot had reached. Confidence collapsed in real time as neighbors grasped the truth. Someone they worked beside had systematically planned their destruction for money. As agents read out the charges, the scene became almost unreal. Mara Benton, you are charged with first-degree arson, federal insurance fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. These weren't petty disputes. These were federal crimes with decades of prison time attached. Professional criminals now faced professional justice. Soon after, co-conspirators were arrested in coordinated raids. The insurance adjuster and property assessor were taken into custody for conspiracy and racketeering. The wider criminal network unraveled, every participant facing the same fate under racketeering statutes. For me, there was no longer any need to argue over property rights or legitimacy of farming. The overwhelming evidence and the authority of the Bureau spoke louder than years of neighborhood politics. Real justice validated victims in ways no mediation ever could. News spread fast. Local media plastered headlines across farming towns. HOA board member charged with agricultural arson for insurance fraud. Agricultural journals carried the story. Public exposure not only held the offenders accountable, but also protected other farms from becoming targets. Neighbors felt betrayed. She told us farmland was a hazard, one resident told reporters. Then she created the hazard herself, for profit. Confidence in leadership collapsed overnight. People felt ashamed for trusting her, realizing how easily influence could be twisted by fraud. The damage rippled far beyond me, undermining trust across the entire community. The investigation widened, uncovering possible schemes across multiple states. The FBI began probing whether Mara had carried out similar fraud elsewhere, using HOA authority to identify farms to destroy for profit. It pointed toward serial arson operations with dozens of victims and hundreds of thousands in fraudulent payouts. My relief at seeing justice was tangled with lingering anger. 40% of my harvest was gone. Sarah's college fund was crippled by someone who measured our pain as her gain. Scars like these outlast money. They leave an exhaustion that hangs over every day. Prosecutors announced the case would proceed as organized racketeering, carrying maximum penalties. A grand jury indicted Mara on 12 felony counts after reviewing the mountain of evidence. First-degree arson alone carried 20 years. Fraud and conspiracy added another 10. Racketeering stacked on 20 more. Restitution for property destruction was mandatory. These were life-altering charges, matching the devastation she had deliberately caused. Federal financial investigators then traced Mara's hidden assets across states and banks, uncovering the full scope of her criminal empire. They uncovered $150,000 stashed in accounts linked to past scams, money funneled into real estate purchases from dirty profits and insurance, policies she had siphoned for years. The proof outlined a long-term pattern of exploiting farmland, a scheme that stretched over decades. It exposed a calculated criminal career disguised as community leadership and property advocacy. While federal prosecutors pressed forward with criminal charges, I filed a civil case demanding full damages: $50,000 for ruined crops, $25,000 for lost future income, $15,000 for emotional suffering, plus punitive damages for her deliberate lawbreaking. Civil court offered more than restitution. It ensured offenders paid the complete price for harming families and the wider community. Federal marshals moved in, seizing all of Mara's property under forfeiture laws designed to strip illegal profits. Her house was mortgaged to cover defense costs, bank accounts locked during the case, rental properties confiscated as proceeds of crime, and vehicles impounded as tools of her schemes. Her financial empire collapsed in direct proportion to the devastation she inflicted. The district itself suffered fallout for failing to oversee their corrupt board member. The HOA's insurance policy was canceled after her conviction for property destruction. Home values sank under the stain of organized racketeering, and legal bills mounted as the district defended against liability claims from victims. Wrongdoing spreads like shockwaves, harming entire communities far beyond the first households. Her partners opted for plea deals instead of gambling on trial for racketeering charges. The insurance adjuster and property assessor testified against her in exchange for lighter sentences, laying out planning meetings and profit splits. The conspiracy fell apart as loyalty gave way to survival. The myth of honor among criminals proved false once again. High court testimony gave me a chance to show the real toll on farming families. "She didn't just burn my crops," I told the judge. "She destroyed my family's security and my neighborhood's trust, all to pad her profits. The tribunal acknowledged that agricultural racketeering threatens not just fields, but food security and rural stability far beyond immediate losses. National guidelines classified arson for profit as a violent crime requiring maximum punishment. Prosecutors argued that systematic property destruction for insurance payouts amounted to domestic terrorism against farming regions. This defendant, they said, destroyed families out of greed and deserved punishment, matching the severity of her crimes against agriculture and food supply. The case set a national precedent, establishing clear grounds for prosecuting agricultural arson fraud. This new standard protected farming districts by affirming federal authority and mandating maximum penalties for property destruction masked as civic advocacy. Future offenders would face the same strict prosecution and identical penalties. I felt vindicated knowing the justice system proved those who destroy farm families would face complete personal ruin. No neighborhood politics, no hollow mediation, only professional courts delivering professional punishment. National justice does not negotiate with arsonists who torch livelihoods for gain. The judge scheduled sentencing to include victim impact statements and consideration of the highest penalties allowed. Prosecutors urged maximum sentences on every count, served back-to-back rather than at the same time. That meant 25 to 30 years in federal prison, total financial ruin, and a permanent criminal record. Punishment equal to the crimes. The court delivered exactly that. 25 years in federal prison for arson and racketeering, a $500,000 fine, full restitution to every victim, 10 years of supervised release, and a permanent felony record. Her life dismantled by law, just as she had dismantled so many others. Your Honor, she didn't just burn crops, I testified at sentencing. She burned my family's stability, my daughter's education fund, and the trust of an entire district. Even 25 years felt too lenient for someone who destroyed lives for money. Still, federal law guaranteed she could not harm more farm families while behind bars. Victim statements gave a sense of closure no prosecution alone could offer. Federal marshals liquidated every asset to pay restitution and fines. Her house was sold to repay victims, properties seized as criminal proceeds, bank accounts drained for penalties, and personal belongings auctioned into a victim compensation fund. She was left with nothing, a mirror image of the financial ruin she had caused. The restitution order covered more than insurance ever would. $50,000 for destroyed crops, $25,000 for lost future income, $20,000 for emotional harm, and $15,000 for legal expenses. My daughter Sarah's entire college tuition was secured from the forfeited funds. National law ensured that victims were repaid directly from the pockets of those who tried to destroy them. The new HOA leadership issued a public apology. She acted alone, without our knowledge or support. We stand with our agricultural neighbors and condemn unlawful actions that damage community, trust, and property values. They promised reforms to prevent future abuses of authority. This case cemented national policy for prosecuting agricultural arson fraud, extending protection across rural America. The president reinforced federal jurisdiction and the use of maximum penalties for farm-targeting crimes disguised as insurance claims. These laws provided not only restitution, but long-term safeguards for rural communities. During recovery, I realized the justice system offered more than money. It proved that those who destroy families are themselves destroyed by law. Professional enforcement and federal courts provided validation that neighborhood politics never could. True accountability means real consequences. Sarah's future was fully secured with restitution taken straight from the felon's assets. Dad, her money is paying for my education instead of destroying it, she told me after checking her college fund. Forfeiture laws turned stolen profits into resources for victims, restoring opportunities the offender had tried to erase. The district's healing required recognizing the difference between genuine property concerns and fraudulent crises invented for profit. Neighbors learned to separate real safety issues from fabricated ones. This awareness helped shield towns from future exploitation of civic processes. Agricultural media nationwide reported the case. Headlines read, "National Arson Conviction Protects Farm Rights from HOA Fraud Schemes." Public coverage warned other regions to spot and report such scams early. The conviction created a permanent legal record, protecting farms from future harassment under the guise of safety concerns. Mara's criminal record now follows her everywhere, exposing her true history to any future community. Sometimes defending your land means helping federal officers stop those who think they can burn down your life for gain. After reviewing the case, I reflected on my 20 years as a volunteer firefighter. Those years taught me how to fight flames. But national cooperation taught me how to fight fraud through real enforcement, not fragile neighborhood committees. Other farming regions now use this case to train families on spotting land grab schemes disguised as safety. Prevention matters most, though prosecution also plays a role. She torched my harvest for greed, and the system torched her life in return. Years in prison. Watching new crops sprout from scorched fields, I realized one truth. Accountability always catches up. If you're still reading, what would you have done in my place?